Hello and welcome.
Fair enough. Well, on that note, welcome back to the show, the Church of Mark. We have Doug Bedard, Plex, with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And it's been, I guess it's been a while since we've seen you in person, although we saw you at the...
Summer Solstice
That's right.
Indigenous Music Awards.
In Ottawa, and we got to see you perform, and that was such a wonderful performance. I guess you did like a medley of songs?
Yeah, I mixed up a couple tracks. I just had to think about what I wanted to perform and say, and then also like what worked for the crowd. So a little bit for me, a little bit for them. So I kind of split it into two.
That's awesome. And are you currently working on any new material, or
I'm about half done, like maybe an 8-track EP.
Okay.
Yeah. Not on 8-track, like eight songs.
Right.
8 songs. So.
That's right. You can put it on cassette and
I might have about 5 songs in.
5 songs. Okay, great. Yeah. And so do you have like a tentative release date, or when do you want to do that?
No, because I've been sitting on some of it for a while. Like some of it was like recorded when, some of it was written for sure when we did Who Am I to Judge?
Right.
So like there were songs that potentially could have made it to that album.
Right.
They were ideas and demos and stuff, but I've kind of refined them, and I like to get used to them now. Like, because I don't work with a team. Like I'm not working with a team. Like I'm not working with a huge team where I've got like somebody running the boards or making the beats. Like I'm usually making the beats, writing the lyrics, recording myself, maybe passing it on for someone to mix and master, and then handing it off to Related Music, of course,
right.
to take care of the other parts of it, like that I have. I'm just not business savvy in, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm doing all the work, so a lot of times I need to finesse it more. Like I have nobody calling me out when I might take a breath at the wrong time, or if the syllable is slightly out of place. So I need to listen to it over and over again before I actually can refine it, and that's basically my process.
Okay. And do you find it challenging? Because I know you have other, things that you do, and of course you're a family man, you have kids, and that must take up a lot of your time. So how are you kind of managing your schedule?
You know what? I'm sloppy with that too. I mean, thankful for Google Calendars, because I do put a lot of stuff, even if it's for like a reminder to feed the cat, like right down to a T. Like I need that in my life because I'm a little sloppy that way. And I've got Jen, my wife is right. Jennifer Podemsky is my wife, and she's a little bit more, she's just really good at like multitasking. And a portion of her multitasking is to make sure that I stay on task. Okay. So I mean, I own a company that does real estate marketing materials, and it's been pretty busy for me. Like
I've seen the videos; they are amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. But it's it's going on 8 years.
Okay.
8 years of that, and I have employees, but a lot of times people still want Doug to show up.
Of course.
They don't know about my alter ego Plex.
That's right.
And it's just lucrative. That's really what kept me in it. It's a creative endeavor, and I'm not 100% creative when it comes to music. Right. I need to kind of diversify and like push, be a little creative over here, because I might have a writer's block for like several months. Mm-hmm. So I can't just sit down and write an album. I wish I could. I know rappers that do.
Sure.
But for me, it's I just have to kind of do other things in the meantime. So the real estate thing has been good for me. It's been useful for me. It's also helped me afford my own projects.
Right.
So I like that.
Right.
And also, the music royalties have been good.
Well, that's good. That's right.
Can't complain about that.
No, you can't. Especially getting airplay on Sirius XM. I think it's like $44 US a spin.
I never knew what the numbers were, but at least that kind of gives me an idea of how many times it's playing.
There you go. Yeah. That's right. And there's also ways to track how many times it's playing too. I'm sure we could let you know, or Laura could let you know. The label could let you know how many times it's been played. We have
Sometimes it's better not to see behind the curtain.
Okay. We won't let you know anything anymore.
Yeah, I kind of want to just be oblivious. Like
we don't even know if it's on the radio, actually.
They're just sending me money.
So it's interesting. How did you get into the real estate sort of videos?
You know what? It started with Much Fact. So it used to be Video Fact.
Right.
And then it became Much Fact. And there were times where I had submitted grants, and I'm not a great grant proposal or grant writer, but we would submit grants. And I had received one. It was like the smaller one, like the online marketing one. It was like $3,500. But they had the other ones where it was like diversify. I guess what do they call it? Where they split it up. It's like they split it up. So you have a $40,000 budget. but it's really $20,000 they give you.
That's right.
But I can't remember what they call it, but I applied for a few of those, and I saw artists that I thought were not of the same caliber get them, and I didn't. So I always felt a little bit slighted, and what that did to my confidence and just how I felt that it brought me down, I just didn't want to keep experiencing that same feeling. So I just started looking into purchasing cameras.
Okay.
And after a while, trial and error, YouTube tutorials. I slowly got better.
Right.
And my sister-in-law, Tamara Podemski, she got married not too far from Niagara Falls, like Grimsby or something like that. And I just had the camera with me. So throughout the weekend that we were spending in Grimsby with like 100 people there, maybe more, I was just filming everything as it was going. And I look back at the video that I did for her. I mean, at the time, people were like, wow, you should do this for a living.
Right.
And somebody actually invested money for me to buy more equipment when they saw the video. I look at it now and it looks like a piece of shit, right? But at the time, it's just like, it was something that got my foot in the door. There was a real estate company based out of Barrie that saw that, and they reached out to me, but they were only reaching out to me because they wanted me to shoot their wedding.
Oh, okay.
And it didn't work out. Like, it didn't work out that I shot their wedding, but they were in the middle of building this real estate company and asked me to come shoot some houses. And at the time, it was all sliders. You were in a house for like 3 hours. It's just too time consuming. And based on what I was getting paid, it didn't seem worth it because I had already done some corporate gigs that paid really well. Mm-hmm. But they were few and far between. I had nothing really stable at the time. As a musician, I was kind of used to that already. There's nothing really stable about being a musician. But he reached out. He said, come shoot some houses. I hated it. I vowed to never do it again. And then about a year later, he called me and said, hey, they've changed the gear. There's these things called gimbals.
Oh, yes, gimbals.
And they just make it way more smooth. And so I started doing these walkthroughs on the house, and I get in and out of a house under an hour, and it just bulked up. We started out with 10 listings a week, and then the next thing you know, it was 40 listings a day. And by the time it got to 40 listings a day, between 20 listings a day to 40 listings a day, I wasn't making more money because I'm only physically capable of shooting so many listings, right? So they were hiring more people. So the company, it sounded great that the company had grown that big and that I had been, a huge part of helping it grow, but it didn't make me wealthier.
Right.
So I basically decided to kind of focus on music again because I'd taken a 3-year absence from it, or if not longer. But as far as real estate was concerned, it was 3 years that took me away from music because I was working 7 days a week, sometimes 20 hours in a day.
Right.
Went on my own. I broke off and just was done with real estate. And then the agents found me on Facebook. Oh. They're like, where are you, man? We need you back. Like, the company really went downhill after you left. And that was part of the reason I left in the first place because I've always been like, my pride gets in the way. I have a lot of ego. I'm always focused on the quality of things. I mean, sometimes I let it slide in the music stuff because I also have more pride and I want to do it in one take.
Sure,
right?
of course.
So then I listen to it later. I'm like 2 years down the road. I'm like, why didn't I just re-record that? But with the real estate stuff, I was doing my best work. Right. And then there's other moving parts. And if I felt that somebody who was editing my video didn't do a good job, then it bothered me. So I broke off. And then when I was getting all the messages from the agents, I just decided to take on a few agents. And then it just grew on its own. Okay. So we're a referral-only business.
Right.
And we've got about 60 clients that call us.
Oh, wow.
So it's fairly lucrative for me.
That's great.
If I'm working, like we have like little lulls too, like Christmas time.
Of course, that's right.
And holidays, but and then the interest rates go up, so it messes things up for me. But as an Indigenous business owner, I feel like I call it a success story.
Oh, absolutely. That totally is. And speaking of interest rates and stuff going up, have you noticed a difference in the housing market, or houses staying longer on the market, or are still people buying them like there's no tomorrow?
Well, I think it depends because the region that I live in, because I don't live in Toronto, I live in Barrie, Ontario. And I find that, a lot of people who can't afford to buy here, to them it looks like a sweet deal up there.
Right.
Especially you get more house. If you want to move into a 4,000 square foot house, like total square foot, you can get that for a fraction of what it costs here.
That's right.
So, I mean, I benefit from that because I get paid no matter what, whether the house sells or not. Right. Like as long as it lists, I get paid.
Right.
So I've been fortunate enough to be able to employ others and train others to kind of do it. I'm also like pretty generous in the fact that I'll also share, let people pick my brain and share what I do.
Right.
I'm not like trying to hoard information like, most of society, right? They're always trying to figure out how to meter information or just make, maximize profit on giving you information. I'm surprised YouTube has been, relatively free for this long.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot more ads now on YouTube. At least I've been noticing that.
I pay for the
You pay the premium,
yeah,
I
I pay
guess.
the premium. I don't want to see the ads.
I hear you.
Life's too short. Life's too short,
too.
man. I can't be
You're
watching
right.
watching, Expedia ads.
That's right. I know most of the ads I get on YouTube is that it's not even a product I would even buy.
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of surfing, incognito. So
Yeah.
I don't get a lot of ads or my data tracked. So I'll get ads on everything from like detergent to F-150 trucks to jewelry to like things that I would never even purchase.
I think a lot of that's based on the conversations you're having outside. Like, I mean, you don't carry a cell phone around, but I do.
That's right. That's
so,
right.
I mean, I'll make a joke about penises, and next thing you know, I'm getting erectile dysfunction medication ads.
Right.
It's like, like my Facebook is like, "Do you suffer from ED?"
That's right.
Like, I mean, that's how I discovered what ED was
ED?
from the ads.
Right. Well, it's not executive director.
Yeah.
Okay. So for your last record, Who Might Have Judged? That was a record you'd worked on for was it quite some time? Like you said, you don't necessarily can write say an entire record in a week or a month. It takes you time to put it together.
That's true, but some of the songs were intended for an earlier album. So when I started making the album, it was really based around a song called We Know.
Okay.
And We Know calls out a couple people. One who's, allegedly a pretendian, and another one who's definitely native but had been involved in some scandal.
Right.
And I didn't get along with either of them.
Sure.
So the song We Know was like the first song that I made, and I didn't want to just release that as a single. I think it's just a little controversial.
Sure.
Controversial.
Yeah.
And it might get some backlash because a lot of people are allies to these folks. At the time when I wrote it, the second gentleman, the Indigenous gentleman, hadn't even been called out for a lot of the stuff that he had done.
Okay.
And so at the time, if I had released that song right then, it probably would have been poor timing. I probably would have got attacked if anyone figured out who I was talking about because,
right.
I don't really know what the legalities are, but I try to be a little bit subtle and use a little bit of discretion when I do these songs. So I'm not really naming names.
Of course. Right.
And I thought, I can't just release this as a single. Is there something else I can release it with? So I started kind of going through my hard drives, and I was like hearing songs that I spent a lot of time and effort to build, but never released them. And I thought, well, maybe if I just take a couple of those, and then I just started feeling a little bit more inspired because the way that I listen to stuff is or the way I even kind of like build stuff is I just listen to it over and over again. So then I start moving the songs, I change the order, and then I kind of build it outward from there. So I had the opportunity to that, and it would kind of inspire me more to start working on other songs.
Okay.
And when we did Great Ones, and we did, I threw Bad Guy on there. So Bad Guy was this older song from like 2016.
Right.
And then I just kind of incorporated some of those older tracks and completed the album. So,
Okay.
I mean, there were a few new ones. I mean,
Right.
I'd have to look at the track list right now to tell you which ones were a little bit
Sure.
older and which ones were newer. But
I gather was Red Flags one of the newer songs, or
Red
was
Flag-
that part of the original?
no, the album was done without Red Flags.
Okay.
And then while waiting to kind of, strategize when the best time to release the album was, I've been reading about more people pointing out the pretendian, this
Sure.
person's in academia.
Right.
You've seen some actresses, directors getting called out.
That's right.
I just felt like this is a song that I think is important, and it's based on some of the stuff. Like, I'm not always commenting on stuff on social media. I used to. In the early days of social media, I couldn't stop myself.
Sure.
And sometimes it was definitely, I look at that version of me back then. Like I was just so new. Like the internet, the social media, the ability to just say what you want at any time was so new that I didn't really know how to navigate it.
I think we're learning to navigate as
Yeah.
a species.
Yeah.
Like I see everyone sort of changing throughout the years how they're posting.
Absolutely. So I look back on those days, and if it pops up, and Facebook will always be there to shame me. It feels like they're shaming me.
That's
They're just
right.
reminding me, hey,
Under
remember
the
this
memories?
7 years
That's
ago?
right, yeah.
7 years ago, you were a total dick. And a lot of times, at least I can see that though.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I think it helps me improve the way I am with my social skills. Just the way I am socially.
What's also an important part of self-awareness.
Yeah.
So that you aware at the times that you were a dick, and hopefully we can all do things to improve our behavior.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think the other thing that it does is it helps helps you pull back. Like you don't always have to comment on every single thing. You don't always have to get the last word.
That's right.
So a lot of times, I'm just, although I might not be commenting, I'm looking at the comments. I'm looking at the posts.
Right.
And seeing those conversations inspired me to get kind of more involved. And that's where Red Flags came out.
Okay.
Just seeing some of the things, like you're seeing what people say about you. Like we're not at the level where there's just so much love or hate that you don't see a lot of it. You're seeing pretty much anything anyone says about
That's
you.
Right.
That's negative.
That's right.
So I think with a song like Red Flags, it was born out of that. Right. Seeing what the negative stuff or anything else.
And the comments on the video, they kind of went both ways. I think more were in support of the music and the message, although you did have some people kind of sort of against that sort of thing.
Well, absolutely. I definitely had some haters. Mm-hmm. And I guess, in the early days of my music career, I only noticed the love. And I mean, if in hindsight, I guess there was probably some hate. But I've just never been used to the hate part.
Sure.
Because, I've always had good intentions around making songs.
Right.
Even with Red Flags. It sounds like a hateful song, but for the most part, it's well intended. It's to try to create conversations that I think are important. They're important to me, at least.
It is important, yes, for sure.
And I think with the hate, I mean, I see it. And I think it's kind of shifted now because in the song I refer to Buffy as Buffy St. Marie for anybody who doesn't know who I'm talking about, whatever planet you're living on. With Buffy, I kind of used her as the benchmark. It was like almost like she was the native Jesus. And I refer to her like, what would Buffy do? Because it's a common saying, what would Jesus do? So I just said, what would Buffy do? Like, am I doing the right thing by calling people out for being pretendians?
Right.
Or is this something I should be quiet about? I don't really know. I was on the fence. But I had a personal beef with somebody who I believe is a pretendian, based on information that was given to me by people he'd grown up with.
Sure.
And the song was rooted around him, but inspired by other individuals. Although it sounds like I'm talking about one person, there's a little bit rooted in other people's activities.
Sure. Right.
But for the most part, a lot of the most recent comments that come from it are, oh, I bet you wish you could take back that Buffy line.
Right, that's right, yes.
And sometimes I actually do feel that, but not for the same reason. I think it's kind of interchangeable. It's like, what would Buffy do? Make sure you don't do that.
That's right.
Right, so it's kind of like, it reinvented with the news that came out last year. So
Right. But I think it's important to have these difficult conversations, and music, I think, is a way maybe to bridge some of these conversations, or at least get people thinking about what's happening out there. Because the whole pretendian, I know there's probably a lot of people watching this thinking, I'm tired of hearing about this topic. That's because it probably doesn't affect them, or they're defending someone, of course, that they admire or they respect as an artist. So I'm not sure what the road is forward in addressing this. I mean, online I've talked about this, and that maybe at the end of the day, it's up to individuals within our own sort of circles of influence to kind of not police the industry, but we throw our support towards artists that we believe that are truly Indigenous and truly trying to put their best foot forward. At least that's the way I'm going to try to operate or, live my life. But what do you say there?
Well, I mean, I think there's limited resources already. And although, like, when you look at, like, scholarships and anything in the academic world, there's probably a lower turnout for those opportunities than you'd think. So the fact that there's such a low turnout, pretendians or maybe people who've able to find one distant ancestor, they might see that as an opportunity that's being squandered. So why wouldn't I move in on that?
Right.
And I don't really know what the backstory is for a lot of these people.
Right.
I think sometimes it could be a case of maybe hearing something when they were young, or maybe their mom saying, "Oh, my grandfather was a quarter Native," and it's like somehow that that just became their story, right? That, oh yeah, I'm part Native or I'm Native,
right?
And I think for the most part, in a lot of cases, I kind of feel like it's rooted in mental illness. I think that's a part of the discussion that we're not really talking about a lot.
Right.
There just seems to be something. It's almost like you can get away with pretending to be Native, but you can't get away with doing that in any kind of like profession. You know, like I can't dress up as a cop and go pull somebody over.
That's right, yeah.
And people would take offense to that. They'd be very pissed off at me if I did that. But
it is a criminal offense as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Impersonating a police officer.
And that's a discussion that I think needs to be brought up is why is there no repercussions? Like no repercussions for anybody that's pretending to be Native. I know there's one example of it, and that's those Gill sisters.
That's right.
Yes,
that's right. The mother was found guilty, but the sisters were dismissed of the charges.
And just like a lot of like property crimes or offenses, violence, you got someone who'll take be the scapegoat.
That's right.
And the other people get off. I think that's kind of what it was. Right, Whereas I see it as like, hey, if you're all doing something that's dishonest, you got to answer to that stuff. I work on like raising my kids so that they understand honesty. You know, and it's hard when a lot of people you've built friendships and relationships with, or created or become allies with, and you find out down the road that they were probably not being truthful.
Right.
It's like, what do my kids think of that? So we have open discussions at home. I'm open with my kids. They're 12 and 14, and I feel like they're at an age where I just should be honest. I don't lie. I don't control what they're allowed to watch. And I feel like I was given that opportunity. My stepdad, he used to like offer me joints when I was 13. Oh. And because I had access to it, I didn't take advantage of it. I actually focus more on sports. Like I think sometimes when we're given the option, and this isn't a one size fits all thing. Like, 'cause some people can't be given the option, right?
That's right.
So I mean, for me, I think my kids, we have a little bit more control in that way. So we do have adult conversations and have for a while. So I do discuss this stuff with them and just ask what they think, and just to let them be able to like kind of formulate their own opinions of it,
right,
or ideas. And the pretending discussion does come up.
Yeah, and I was talking to a few people. We talked about this before we went on air. That I was talking to a few people like in the mainstream music business. They don't. They're not as concerned about the problem as we are, we'll say. In fact, a lot of them aren't even aware that it's happening. Some of them did watch the Fifth Estate special on Buffy St. Marie, but that's to the extent of their knowledge. And it feels like they don't like want to know. Like, out of sight, out of mind, it's not a problem to me.
Well, especially if they've been cool together for a while.
That's right.
I did shows with them.
Right,
or I did, I think that makes it a little bit more difficult is once you become allies. And I think especially like in the arts, there are people who work together, or that might be a client. So they have a hard time accepting. They don't want to call that person out because they have this relationship, this existing relationship. But I mean, I come from Alberta, and most of my cousins, like pretty much all of my cousins, have Native fathers. Like there were, my mom and her siblings, they were mostly women. My mom had, I think it's 4 sisters and a brother.
Right.
And all my aunties and my uncle married Native partners and had kids with Native partners. Whereas my mom, still in high school, met a Ukrainian guy who was my dad. So I was the light-skinned Native in my family. And that's how I was able to recognize the advantages that I had access to over my cousins. Some of them grew up on the res, so they sounded like they're from the res.
Right.
In Alberta, there's like a slightly higher, there's higher rates of racism against Natives.
Right.
Here in Toronto, we're a little bit more invisible. We not that we blend in, we're just so few and far between that we don't.
That's right.
Cross paths as easily.
Right.
So coming out here, I definitely noticed that there was more of a, in Alberta, I would get called out all the time. Like, made fun of because my skin was lighter or my eyes are green, which is why I'm wearing these glasses.
Okay.
I look more Native over here.
All right.
Bougie Native. But when I moved out here, I thought, oh, wow, because it's further east, there's more white presenting Native people out here, and I never really questioned it. But as time goes on, people talk, there's gossip, or there's people that are just like, oh, I remember when he started saying he was Native, which to me was the red flag, which is how I came up with the name. Everybody was naming everything, oh, Red this, Red that, DJ Red, or whatever, right? Red this, Red. Everything is red. Every music festival or album, it was always Red this. So Red Flags was like the perfect title because, you'd see girls, if he does this,
right,
that's a red flag.
Right.
So that was how the song came about. But I would see more and more red flags, especially in Toronto. There just seems to be almost like a network of it.
Right.
And then there are people who call out lateral violence when you approach them on that subject, right? Like asking, and usually it's like, I feel in most of the dialogue has been very civil.
It has.
But it's like somehow spun. It's like, look how hateful this person is. It's lateral violence. And I mean, for me, I grew up in literal violence. Right. So I don't really even look at lateral violence the same way that, I don't even think the word is like, I think sometimes the word violence is just so overused.
Well, as we discussed before we started rolling, a lot of people like to use buzzwords.
Yeah, buzzwords.
Because they don't really know too much about the topic, or they just want to shut down your conversation.
Yeah, I saw like a clip of a podcast the other day, and somebody called out, that's misogynistic. And so he asked, what's your definition of misogyny? And this woman froze up. And I think a lot of times you'll find, if you ask somebody what they're referring to, they can't give you a definition.
Well, I asked someone the other day, because they were referring to blood quantum as being a colonial construct, and well, can you please define colonial? And please, and they couldn't. They didn't even respond.
Yeah, it just sounds cool.
It just sounds cool. That's right. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that. For me, I just, it's not that I'm that invested in it, because really my priorities really start with my family at home.
Right.
I want to just make everything good there. And then so that they can be sent off and kind of do their own thing and maybe spread that same kind of goodness, good intentions, make the world a better place. I think you started out at home, right?
Right.
So that's my first priority.
Great.
The pretendian argue comes somewhere down the line. I have a lot of other priorities. And one of the things that I see people saying is like, why are you bringing this up? And a lot of times it's not like people coming right to me and saying, why are you bringing up this pretendian issue? But you see it in the comments where they say, why are we talking about this? We have all these other issues. And I think that kind of minimizes the whole thing, is because why can't we talk about all those things?
That's right.
If we're Indigenous people and we're affected by 100 different things, why are there some things that are on the table and some things that are not?
It's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah. That's right. I think it's you see a lot of gaslighting. And I never really knew what gaslighting was. It was another one of those buzzwords as far as I was concerned. But really where it's become evident and where I can, kind of understand the definition a little bit more is in the comments about pretendianism. If they call them pretendian hunters, but the way they gaslight the pretendian hunters is I don't even like calling them pretendian hunters. Although it sounds cool. Like, it sounds like a good movie.
Yeah, that's right.
And it probably will be at some point.
That's right.
But, I feel for the people that are concerned, because a lot of the people that are, investigating people's claims, and usually it starts out with just maybe an email or just like a phone call maybe, where they just say, are you Indigenous? What community are you from? Who's your community?
Right. That's right.
And then all of a sudden it blows up into maybe some diversion tactics, because I've seen evidence, right? So I've witnessed evidence, because usually I just ask for it.
Right.
It's like, I don't want to base an opinion yet. Show me a little bit more. Right. So I see a lot of it. And a lot of times these are 60 scoop survivors.
Right.
And I think that maybe they're the most equipped to actually maybe investigate, because they had to do it for themselves.
That's right.
They grew up outside their biological families.
Exactly.
And then maybe later in life trying to reconnect. And I think sometimes, they've got a lot of trauma on them, and some people will question the methods they use without really considering the trauma.
That's right.
And there's also some verbiage that I think that needs to be kind of, sorted out, because some people think you're talking about people who are half native, or a quarter native, or an eighth, or whatever it is, right? So really what I believe they're talking about, and this is just my interpretation, is that they're talking about people with no actual lineage at all.
Yeah, zero ancestry.
Or one so far back that there's probably 1,000 different ancestors in between.
Correct.
So
that's right.
I think that once we get that sorted out, and we actually come up with a like maybe even a broad definition of what that means.
Well, that seems to be the major stumbling block, right? Is that we can, I think, all agree on what's the definition of an Indigenous person, not just a community definition, but we also need a definition. Well, I guess there is one legally.
Yeah.
When you're applying for grants and so forth, because if you are applying for these things and you are not who you say you are, well, you are committing fraud, which is a criminal offense. Last time I checked, under the criminal code. But I don't foresee festivals or granting agencies taking these people to court. But say I am a festival, like, and I want to book, like, say I'm a non-Indigenous festival, but I want to book Indigenous artists, and say I'm worried about hiring potential pretendians. Well, what should I do?
I don't know
how do I book the right artist so I don't get then say the flack later if I book the wrong artist? And
well, I don't know if that's even a big concern to any festival organizers.
Sure.
Other than the fact that they might get called out, but sometimes bad press is good anyway, right? Right. But I think that typically, and that's where the harm of the pretendian comes in, is because if I use Leonard Sumner as an example, you know, he's an extremely talented Indigenous artist. But you take like a white woman who's pretending to be Native, who might be like, you know, fit, looks good, paints her face, does whatever, right?
Right.
They might be more attractive to the festival organizer. We're hitting the quota here.
That's right.
You know, we were asking for some government funding here to get this.
That's right.
We promised we're going to hire some Indigenous artists. Well, you know, Leonard's good, but he's a little too brown for my liking. You know what I mean? It's like, it could be something like along those lines.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably, to me, the most on the surface problem. You know, there's probably more issues within that structure, but for them, I think it's just what's the most digestible? What's our audience going to like? And you got to think of like who's usually like the typical non-Indigenous music festival that, you know, maybe promises to do some Indigenous hiring. Who their audience is. It's probably not going to be the powwow crowd or anybody like that. It's going to be like more like folky music fans.
That's right.
And that works for them, I think.
Right.
You know, they're more likely to maybe buy some merch, buy an album,
That's
become
right.
a fan, connect.
That's right.
You know, so, I mean, it's good. I mean, a similar look in somebody from my reserve is William Prince, and I'm very proud to see him be as successful as he is, and Leonard for that matter.
That's right.
Because I mean, both of them have taken it to levels that I've never reached.
They're doing very well.
Yeah, they're doing very well, and I think that's exactly what I want to see. You know?
Absolutely.
So, I think we have some wins, but a lot of the times we're also watching from the sidelines as pretendians kind of take those spaces, and I think that is something that we're just not talking enough about.
That's right.
I mean, it's mentioned, but I don't think we're able to get it through to the people that are doing the most work in the defendian section of it.
True. So what about things like, say, the Juno Awards, like the Juno category for Best Indigenous Recording? You have to file all this paperwork. You got to provide 2 references, community references that's saying who you are. And I think you got to write an essay. Is that correct, Laura? Basically how you give back to the Indigenous community or music scene. But if I was applying to the hip-hop category or one of the other categories, I don't have to write an essay on how I'm giving back to hip-hop music. What are your thoughts on these sort of requirements to apply for these awards?
I think it's important to point out that I'm personally not a friend of the Junos.
Okay.
You know, and I have reasons for that. And it stems back to my indigeneity. You know, there was one year, and no offense to, I can't remember his name right now, but he was a Winnipeg Blue Bomber. And then I think he worked with Eagle and Hawk for a bit. Vince Fontaine, who's actually like
Troy Westwood.
Yeah, Troy Westwood, a relative of mine. And I think it was Brainstorm that I submitted to the Junos. And I was sent a letter. And I think it was actually Brian Wright McLeod who just gave me a courtesy letter. Okay. Just to say, we can't find anything Indigenous about this album. Like, is there anything in the lyrics that you can point out and quote to us so that we can give it another try, like try and convince the other jurors?
Right.
And I was like, well, I'm Native, and pretty much like all the features on this album, like Ravens and kind of Takta, Relic, other Native artists were on this album. And I couldn't wrap my head around that question, you know? And then when the nominees were announced, Troy Westwood or Little Hawk was nominated.
That's right.
And I was like, I probably wouldn't have cared otherwise, but the fact that they asked me what's Indigenous about my album and then Troy Westwood got nominated, it bothered me. Sure. And I was digging through some old emails recently and found that email, and again, it just triggers me. And then my second album I submitted, and I'm fine with the idea that, hey, I'm not good enough. There's like such great talent out there that I should just try better next time, or, you know, I should try harder next time. My albums aren't perfect. I listen to them and I hear flaws all the time, but for the most part, it's like I've just kind of disconnected from it because it stems back to like the video fact, much fact stuff where I would apply for grants and get denied. And then you can only do that so many times before it really starts to affect your creative process. Mm-hmm. So for the Junos, I'm cool if I get nominated, but I'm not like overly excited. Or, I mean, if anybody who's trying to market me or, help me with promotions and stuff, and they want to use the Juno, that's up to them. But I'm not going to run around saying I'm a Juno award-winning artist.
Right.
I would probably just say award-winning.
We still submit you the Junos. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm not complaining. And again, you're probably going to get the same response. For me, it's not that difficult. Like, I know some people who are allegedly pretendians, and they recently called me out for not defending them publicly.
Oh, really?
And I was like, number one is we can cover this in a second, but
sure.
My brother, I say he's my brother, but he was my first cousin. We were just raised in the same household.
Okay.
So I've always referred to my cousin, Barrie, as my brother.
Right.
He was murdered on my birthday in 2023, so May 2nd, 2023. Within the 3-week span afterwards, we realized he had been murdered. At first, he was just missing, and then we were able to figure out who had done it.
Right.
So my response was just like, please look at your timestamp on your last text to me, which was 3 years prior, or 4 years prior, I think maybe. And read the room before you make accusations towards me. I'm like, my mind is somewhere else right now. I'm not worried about what you're going through.
That's right.
So I was called out for that, and definitely didn't respond well to it.
No, I
definitely didn't respond well to it. But it's basically, one of the things that was brought up was, if this happened to you and Jen, we would be defending you all the way. And I just responded. I said, we wouldn't need you to do that. Like, we have everything in place. You want to take a blood sample?
Yeah.
You want to see the documentation? Do you want to come to my community? I mean, they're sending me ballots every election.
That's right.
So I think that at this point I can assume they accept me.
I'm even on my community's Wikipedia page, actually.
Well, that's nice. I can't get on Wiki. You need to help me with that. I need help with that. I made one. I added myself to Indigenous hip hop at one point, and I do get a mention for my show I had on AVR 10 years ago,
right.
14 years ago. But somebody keeps removing me. It's probably one of those haters. I think it's Manic out in Vancouver. No, I'm just kidding, Manic. I'm just kidding, Manic. We used to have old beef, but we're buddies now. So.
Okay.
He's like, Plex, don't it belong in there. I'm just kidding, Manic.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess there is no real solution in sight for the pretendian issue, because no one really wants to work at solving the problem. So, I think it's basically up to us in individuals within our own circles of influence to support acts that we truly believe are worth that support.
Well, I think Red Flags, just even putting that song out, it's my most viewed video I've ever done.
Yeah, what's the numbers?
I have no idea, but it's in the hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands,
yeah.
That's right.
So I think making that song is like, people think I take it more seriously than I do. Like, when I make a song, it's basically however long it took me to make that song, that's what I was feeling in that time span.
Right.
Next week, I might be feeling a completely different way.
That's right.
But I think everybody thinks that I'm just like, pretendians, we got to get them. Like, that's all I think about.
Sure.
And sometimes it is. I mean, it's not, but I mean, I've got other priorities sometimes. Sometimes my thoughts shift over here. Sometimes I just want to play NHL 24 online.
Right.
But a lot of people will come to me with their concerns. Whether it's, I think this person's a pretendian, or I know this person's a pretendian, or it's, what do you think about that one?
Right.
And a lot of times I think they're waiting for me to share my thoughts publicly.
Sure.
But the way that I do that is I make a song.
That's right.
That's how I put it out on the record, because it's final. You can't really take it back once it's out in the universe. It's just like a Facebook post.
Sure.
As soon as somebody screenshots that, it's there. Like, they can do what they want with it after that, right? So as soon as you go public, and sometimes I try to catch myself, like, as soon as I hit that like return button or send button, I'm thinking, that's not a good thought. So I try to get it off there as quickly as possible.
Right.
But some people don't have that luxury. They're just like, they're in a bigger spotlight, so people take those screenshots. But with my music, that's basically a more well thought out version of a Facebook post. Right. It's like, those are my thoughts and ideas. And with rap, I think you have the luxury of kind of just like squeezing all that information into one song.
Right.
There's just a lot of chances, a lot more syllables, you make it happen. And that's my way of being, like, speaking publicly on the subject.
Right. And music is more digestible too.
Yeah. It is digestible. Yeah. Podcast is also, I don't do a lot of these. I don't do a lot of interviews. Mainly because I'm just like, especially after the murder of my brother, I just feel like more anxious.
Right.
And a lot of times I'm just not ready. It took me this long to actually even talk to you about being here.
Right, that's right.
Like,
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you just started doing this 2 weeks ago.
No, that's right. Yeah.
You know, you put your time in, you put the effort in. But for me, I just don't think I was ready. I just don't think that, you know, and a lot of times, and usually I actually use that example when I'm talking about pretendians, is one of the things, especially in the music and television and movie or film aspect of it, they're doing interviews. And I always feel like that's what's going to harm them, is because sometimes, and I can give you multiple examples. I just don't really want to say names because I really don't know where that puts us financially. But you see their interviews and how they contradict each other, you know, and it's like, and you see stories kind of develop, not in real time, but like, I guess real time because, you know, 6 months down the road it's changing. I think that's what hurt Buffy.
Right.
Buffy had different interviews over a short time span, like 62 to 64. There were like 4 different versions of the story.
I watched a lot of those old interviews after the special that came out, and I was like, oh, yeah, wow. And I found it really interesting. She was against the whole, the law passed in 1990. The, what's it called? The Indian Arts and Crafts Law. Basically, if you are caught either... cultural appropriation, like if, say, you're not Indigenous and you're creating native artwork and selling it or anything, that's a punishable criminal offense in the United States. And before that law was passed, I watched an old interview of her against it, saying it would hurt, you know, Indigenous artists, but she never really explained why in the interview, and I thought that was odd.
I think that there's been new versions of that same argument.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like I've seen people talk about how it hurts Indigenous people getting called out. I think it's because a lot of people are just in denial about the fact that there is no Indigenous ancestry. You know,
that's right. Yeah.
It's like community developed in their later years, and it really sucks because, you know, a lot of us are finding out more about our history. Like a lot of people do. Like it's not just Indigenous people that find out about their history. You find out you had a grandfather who was in the war or whatever, great grandfather who was part of like a signing of some kind of declaration. Right? People outside of Indigenous families experience that.
Right.
So I feel like it kind of robs us of that.
Right.
Like when you see somebody developing their story and it's obvious to us that it's like bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of steals from us even wanting to announce that we're discovering stuff. Like I didn't realize that my grandmother's mom and siblings spoke fluent Cree, but they wouldn't speak Cree around my grandmother. You know, so I didn't know that. I always just kind of assumed. I grew up in Cree country thinking I was Cree, because all my friends are Cree. Right. Everybody I went to school with was Cree.
Sure.
You know, you get some Dene and Blackfoot mixed in there once in a while, but it was essentially everybody was Cree. Then really kind of looking into the fact that my grandfather was always proud to be Ojibwe. Right. You know? So like at the time, you're not even really saying, hey, I'm Cree, or we're just Indigenous, or we're Native at the time. Or Indians.
That's right.
We were Indians back then. So, you know, starting to embrace the Ojibwe part like of me when I became an adult, and letting go of the Cree side that I thought I had. You know, I was raised, my stepfather was part of my upbringing as well, and he speaks fluent Cree. But like I kind of let go of that for a bit, and then realized when just in having just regular conversations with my grandmother that Cree was what they spoke in the house.
Right.
It's just that her generation was where they kind of started stopping with the kids. You know, because there were Indian agents coming out to the communities. Right. You know, my grandmother, who when she married my grandfather, and like hearing his stories after his death was basically like his mom was like 8 years old, hiding in the forest for a couple of days, 8 years old by herself, because the Indian agents were coming, and they would like, hey, Indian agents are coming, or however they would say that, probably in Ojibwe, or Soto. But it's once we discover those parts of our stories, it kind of cheapens, like the pretendians kind of cheapen that.
They do.
That whole process, you know. Right. So I want to be proud of who I am, and I think that, you know, the pretendian discussion, I think, is important for us in order to maintain that pride. You know,
absolutely.
I think because if we just let anybody like say that they're Native, I feel it just devalues the whole process of just who we are, like or the idea of who we are.
That's right. And it seems like this has become a problem more prevalent in modern society. I mean, I don't remember 20 years ago people pretending to be us, but now it seems like everybody wants to be us.
Well, here, I'll tell you this. Like when I was probably 13, I started getting interested in girls. And prior to that, I'd been made fun of for my long hair. You know, made fun of for my long hair, made fun of for the way I talked, you know, which I used to practice saying words differently. You know, one word that came out a little bit later was the way I used to say warm.
Okay.
Like worm.
Right.
And somebody pointed out that it's like, and we had an argument about it. Like they were like, it's warm. I guess that's the right way to say it. Right. And I was like, well, you wouldn't say, I broke my arm. You know,
yeah,
and then they're like, well, you don't say you're going to war. You know, like so.
Right.
You know, but it started to affect me, and I would try to work on, even at a younger age, trying not to. I cut my hair at 13. It was a slow process. I kept a little bit of a mullet for a bit, but then I chopped it all off.
Sure.
And it was basically because I felt like it hurt my chances of meeting women. You know, like because I'd been made fun of so much.
Right.
You know, wearing AC/DC shirts and sweats, and then starting to get into LL Cool J. I just thought, it's a different demographic.
Sure, yeah.
And for me to fit in, and just like I basically let go of my indigeneity for a time being, and I think that a lot of Indigenous people in this country have experienced that. So, for me to see other people just embrace it, a part of that makes me angry. You know, especially knowing that they know that they're not Indigenous,
right?
You know, and that there's opportunities that are out there that they might be able to access.
Right. Is there anything you would say to them directly?
Just watch out. There's more songs coming.
All right.
Watch out. There's more songs coming for sure.
So we're coming up towards the end of the show, and we have a couple of questions
That's
left.
3
Even though
hours.
we don't really have any prepared questions.
Is that 3 hours already?
That's right. It's 3 hours. That's right.
Paid for 3 hours in parking. Man. Let's make the most of it.
So other than the whole sort of pretendian mess that we're in now, what's the biggest problem that you see in the Indigenous music industry itself?
Just that, they're starting to make a priority for Indigenous people to be included. I don't really want it to be obvious that they're making it a priority.
Right.
It should just be.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It should just feel natural.
Right.
Not that we're going to cast, even outside of indigeneity, if, you've got these intergenerational families where even the kid kind of like say, is that kid really from those two parents? Like, I mean, I know it's actors, but they're doing that to be inclusive and try to maybe reach out to a different market. And I feel like sometimes when we're included, it seems too forced. There's a lot of great talent out there.
Absolutely.
There's just such great talent. Like when I met George Leach, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dave Belanger, Burn Project
That's
One.
right, yeah.
Another amazing songwriter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Derek Miller. Like Leela Gilday. One Drum.
Wow.
One of my favorite songs by an Indigenous artist.
Yeah.
I feel like it should just be natural that they just include us.
That's
Not
right.
to be like, well, you know what? Their law just passed. The CRTC says we have to include 50% of this.
That's right.
So
That's right. Yeah.
now we're going to do it because we're forced to do it.
Yeah.
I'd rather it just be the thing.
That's right. Or because some of these festivals, they have like the main stage, but then they have the Indigenous area or the whatever they call it, right?
I'm hitting a couple Indigenous stages this summer.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, that's good they exist. I mean,
I'm not against. At least you know where to find me.
That's right. But it'd also be nice to be programmed in like sort of the main evenings event, and sometimes we are, but a lot of times we aren't. I find.
I think some Indigenous bands are capable of holding that kind of stage. I wouldn't say that I am.
Right.
Mine is basically hip hop with a DJ, a couple performers on stage with me. It's not an enormous live show.
Right.
Whereas Snotty Nose Res Kids, I mean, they've got to refine. They rehearse the shit out of it, and they just have a very refined, well executed show.
Right.
And that they're able to tour and can consistently do that. I mean, they're a lot younger than me, so I mean, sometimes someone's asking me to do a 45-minute set. I'm just like, how can we make this happen? Like, are you sure you want me? Like, 20 minutes sounds about right for me,
It takes a while. Like I've been doing this crazy tour where I got to play 2 sets, like night after night with no breaks. Yeah. So, and I'm in my mid-50s now.
Wow. You look good, man. You look good.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I've known you for at least 15 years, right?
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
A long time. Probably close to 20 years, maybe. What year is it now?
So I've been with Jen for 17 years. I moved out here in 2007. So
okay,
shortly after that.
Shortly after that.
You know where it was? It was Renegade Radio, Brian Wright McLeod.
Right, that's right. Yeah. He actually just lives down the street. He's like a block away from us.
Nice.
Hey, Brian, how's it going?
Yeah, you sat in on, they interviewed me, him and Victoria Vaughn.
That's right.
And then you sat in, and that's where we met.
Oh,
and
that's right.
I think at the time I asked you I was like, what about George Leach? And you're like, who? I was like, because that was right when I discovered him. Like, he was
right.
He wasn't roommates with Tamara, but he was renting the apartment that she owned.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And my wife was like, "Oh, George lives right across the street." I'm like, "George who?" Like George Leach. And I was like, right away. I knew the name. I'd seen him perform once before.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, that was when I got to hear "Carry Me." Like Carry Me didn't come out for several years, but I think that's one of the best written songs.
It is.
He did that with Togs. I think he's like a Sony publisher or something like that. It was. Just
it's very well done. It's very polished.
Very well done.
Yeah.
Like there should have been like $100,000 music video attached.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's unfortunate he's not on more like bigger stages either. Yes. I'm not sure if he's got a new record coming up. Maybe he can get in touch with us, George.
Sometimes it's representation too, right? Like if you have somebody who's just like dog eat dog, let's get him out there. You have to have George Leach on stage, and maybe it works. But George might be handling his stuff. I don't really know the details of that.
Right.
I do think the quality of what he does is amazing. And there's one thing that stood out to me lately. Like my son he's 12 years old. He was listening to Weezer and Nirvana and different bands like that, and then just out of nowhere became an MF Doom fan.
Oh.
And then that opened the floodgates for him to explore more underground, older hip hop.
Right.
So I realized that there's a resurgence in this older style of music, which
there is.
I've kind of stayed faithful to. I didn't evolve to sound like whatever you hear on the radio now.
Sure.
I've kind of just stayed true to who I was, based on the fact that I make music because I don't want to lose my mind. This is what keeps me grounded and sane.
Right.
So the fact that people are looking into older stuff in the catalog, I think it offers the opportunity to maybe even revisit that stuff. So if George really wanted to do a music video for Carry Me, I think it's still possible. I think that song could be re-released.
There you go.
A lot of songs are making resurgence. You're seeing it, especially when they're included in soundtracks on popular television shows like Running Up That Hill, right?
Exactly.
She made more money off that song from Stranger Things than she made it from the 80s.
There you go. Sync licensing, people. Sync licensing.
Yes.
So with that said, say I'm an Indigenous musician, I'm living here in Toronto, or maybe I'm living on the res, away from a major center, and say I want to get into the music business. What kind of advice would you give that person watching the show right now? Other than don't get in the music business.
That's the typical response, but it's usually just out of humor, right? It's because we've taken some bumps and bruises along the way. But I think that really it's so streamlined now. I mean, songs have a shorter shelf life than they ever did, right? I mean, that's right after we're talking about running up that hill, coming back 40 years later.
Right.
But you release a single, it doesn't chart for 6 weeks or 3 months like it used to back in the day with the pop songs.
That's right.
But the one benefit that where music has evolved is just the technology. So you're able to create and learn. We have YouTube and different types of tutorials that exist out there. So if you want to learn guitar, you want to learn any instrument, you can do that. You want to learn how to make beats, like it's there. Like you can. My son's making beats on his phone.
Oh wow!
So I mean, we've come a long way, and things have gotten easier. When I started, you're using like grandfather Cubase, like on Atari.
Right. That's right. Yeah,
it was just a sequencing software.
The Atari ST. I love that.
Yeah, you needed a sampler. Like I had a Kurzweil K2000 in the beginning, and that was what it had the sounds.
That's right.
And this is what controlled to tell it where.
And were you still using floppy disks and stuff?
We were using floppies. We were using the 3.5.
3.5. That's right.
3.5, and then we graduated to ADAT.
Oh man, ADAT.
We're using SVHS.
That was a big deal when it came out. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't as easy to punch in.
No.
If you're gonna try to perfect your vocals, you had to really nail it.
That's right.
It was very difficult unless you layered it. But that's where it really started. I mean, where it really started for me was taking the dual cassette.
Oh yeah, that's
playing a part of a beat.
Yeah.
Rewinding it and just recording, pause dubbing it, and then I would have it would be a little choppy in some spaces, but that's how I wrote my raps.
Okay.
Yeah, so
you had to do what you had to do.
Yeah, so I think nowadays people have more access to things. I mean, our attention spans are a little bit all over the place, but for the most part, I think it's a lot easier for anybody to do what we were doing 30 years ago.
Right.
So yeah, go with it. There's a lot more competition out there, but I mean, the people with true talent or determination, or if you have both, I think they're the ones that get through.
Absolutely. Definitely persistence.
Yeah.
You got to keep at it.
I've seen persistent artists beat out talented artists any day of the week.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're there long enough, eventually someone's going to notice what you're doing.
So if you have elements of both, I think you have a pretty successful career ahead of you.
Right. So then what's next for Plex?
I'm going to keep working on the album.
Okay.
Definitely going to keep making money in the real estate world while I can, because I always expected it to kind of end at some point.
Right.
Somehow we've made it through what probably is a recession right now, but I would keep that alive. A lot of people depend on me now, so I think it's important for me to not squander that.
No, of course, that's right. Yeah.
Try and figure out how I can balance all these elements in my life and just keep making music. There was a time where I was 28 years old, and I thought I was too old for this stuff, and now I'm 20 years old, almost 20 years older than that, and I feel like I'm just beginning again. I feel actually inspired again.
It seems like I don't know how old are you, if you don't mind.
I'm 47.
Okay.
47.
So what I've been reading, the 50s are the new 40s, right?
My favorite rappers are in their 50s.
There you go.
So I'm okay.
You have a lot more, I think, music and life still to offer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for watching.